got a great film to play, just
Hello?
Have you ever snogged a lady?
We had a technical problem.
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on there.
Can I swear? Shit!
Welcome to Crunch and Roll, a podcast about the side of the radio industry that most people never hear about, featuring some of its most interesting characters. My name is John Fox. You may be thinking, well, what are you doing hosting Crunch and Roll? Well, I worked my way through hospital and student radio, presented commercial radio breakfast shows in Hull, Reading, Birmingham and Stoke. They even had a bash at presenting on the BBC. So it's safe to say that I know which side of the mic to talk into. Or do I? Okay, now look, before you start shouting, we've got somebody else on from Viking. I know it's not my fault that that's where one of the finest presenters ever, one of my radio heroes, the person who made me want to get into the industry, just so happened to work. Scott Makin is his name, and he is not a Geordie. Scott's worked in pretty much every major market in Yorkshire and the North East, so if you've lived in Sheffield, Leeds, Hull, Middlesbrough or Newcastle in the last 30 years, there's a good chance you know his dulcet tones. And what tones they are. Over the next hour, hear about the full Monty performance featuring a former guest of this pod, meeting a scary listener in a bar, and also the maddest story of how he came to present breakfast on Century. Before we start, just another reminder that if you do enjoy the podcast and you are a regular listener, we'd be grateful if you could support us on Ko-fi. Just go to ko-fi.com/crunch and roll. And thank you to everybody who supported us recently, including Mark Blackman, Andrew Baker. Thank you for the email, by the way. Keep us updated. And the delightful, the beautiful human being, Mr. Simon Timothy Green. Okay, let's crunch and roll. Oh, yeah. Scott, how are you?
I'm really good. Honestly, Foxy, I'm thinking, how long's it been? I'm looking at my watch. It's been a few years.
Oh, it has been a few years. Can I just say, there's a couple of things I want to start off with before we get onto your career. Firstly, you've become more Geordie.
Technically I'm a Teessider. To you, okay. It'll sound like a Geordie, but technically I'm a Teessider. So I think that probably coming back to the Northeast in the noughties after leaving Viking, and then going back to CFM, and that's probably kind of, just my natural accent coming back, really. So you'll still get me jocking it up on air, but really, off air, you'll still get the Teessider.
It's interesting because I've never kept it a secret that when I was growing up and listening to Viking, which was the station I always dreamt of being on, I've never kept it a secret that you were my favourite, Scott. So this is, and we've had some amazing guests on Crunch and Roll so far, some incredible broadcasters, people I'm in awe of, but and this sounds like I'm really fanboying here, but you were the one for me, Scott.
Oh, mate, honestly, I can only say that you really lowered your standards, but thank you. Honestly, John, that means an awful lot. And it did, because we only met towards the end of my time at Viking, and I only knew about this side of you. I think it was at my leaving do, actually. And it was Darren Leatham who pointed out, and of course they said that, they started calling you Stan, of course with reference to Eminem. And they said, have you seen Stan? And I'm going, Stan, Foxy. And I said, what? He said, he loves you. And I'm going, nah. And they went, oh, yeah. So thank you, mate. Honestly, I have no idea, and I don't know what to say or what to ask, but I don't know why it was me. But thank you. I appreciate that, mate. It's
the voice was one thing, but I just thought you were the coolest guy on air. And I genuinely did.
Even more so than JK and Joel and Cameron.
I looked up to all of you guys because, I do strongly believe that if you weren't a part of that team, and myself and Tom, we were there during the bitter end of that, really, those glory days. But unless you were part of that team, I don't think anyone will really understand. I don't know what the word is, the love that we all had for each other as a team.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Certainly, my era down there was kind of early 97 to mid 2000. So it was a very short kind of three and a half years. But it was an amazing time. And what's been lovely is kind of chatting to Joel, chatting to Jane, people like that, who went on to kind of Key 103 and to Radio 1, etc., to Virgin. And they still said that their best time ever out of all those stations was at Viking. And there was definitely something about it. And I don't know, obviously you had Logan there anyway, and Simon had been there for quite some time. Steve Jordan had been there for quite some time. But generally, I think for most of us, it was our first major gig. You know, we'd kind of been on the periphery, you know, of doing weekends or fill-ins, or we'd just starting out. But certainly for me, that was my first major gig. And it was just a great time, to the point where when I moved back to TFM, because TFM was my home station, that's where I started out before moving to Viking. Genuinely, I didn't want to come back. You know, the people, you know, around East Yorkshire were just the best. My daughter had been born down there, and it was really hard to leave. It was just that it was the right time, and I'm glad I left. Looking back now, I'm glad I left when I did. But it was just a gorgeous time, so it will always be forever looked on with fond memories. There was never a bad time for me at Viking.
Well, we'll get on to Viking in just a second, because I, alongside your career, I don't want to talk about the horrific moment I met you, my hero, for the very first time. So I'll tease that for later. Now, excuse my northeast ignorance. Anywhere above York, I'm pretty lost. But you're from Middlesbrough.
I am, yeah.
Yes.
I am a borough boy. Yes, I am, and born and bred in the borough. And I now live in Redcar, which is just out on the coast, so it's just a few miles away from Middlesbrough. And I moved there in 2000 when I came back from Hull.
So tell me about how you even got the passion for radio.
Completely by accident. I'm not going to lie, John. And this is where it gets a little bit kind of, I don't know, I feel kind of as if I've stolen somebody's life, stolen somebody's career, and because I kind of fell into it. And, you know, and it's lovely. Don't get me wrong, I do have a passion for it. But, I mean, we know that, you know, so many people, we know a lot of the geeks around, you know, obviously there's no finer broadcasters than the likes of Hursty, you know, ultimate geek, John Foster, again, a big geek, you know. But for me, I never had that. I enjoyed radio, but I never thought, oh, you know, that's what I want to do, or this is all I want to do since I was an embryo. You know, it was purely by accident. So I kind of, when I left school, you know, as you can tell, I wasn't a clever lad, and I ended up going to college. And of all the things, I thought of going into journalism. And then I thought, oh God, I've got to do another 4 years. I was thinking, no, screw that. And I ended up doing shorthand and typing, right? And I ended up being pretty good at it. So I ended up being a secretary, genuinely. Yeah, genuinely. By trade, I'm a secretary. So I did all the shorthand, did all the typing. And at the time when I left college, so that was about 1987, very much kind of, it was like a girl going into being a mechanic. You know, it was a completely different kind of work. And people kind of looking at you going, you do what? Yeah, I'm a secretary. And but it worked for me, you know, and I got a couple of jobs off the side of that. And my first job was as a receptionist for a big international chemical company. And I was getting calls from around the world because rumor got around that a guy was actually answering the phones. You know, so you're like, what, you know, and then, so that was good. But then I kind of, about 3 years into doing that, I was thinking, is this it? Is this all there is to life? But at the same time, I'd been playing in and out of club bands, and, you know, I was kind of big into doing that. And I had no idea what I fancied doing. And it was purely by chance that I got into TFM doing just answering the phones on the late night phoning. And this was kind of 1990. And again, but there was no aspiration to be on air. There was no kind of, it was just like, it was another outlet to music for me. And then from there, I ended up from answering the phones. I ended up, you know, running tape shows and all that kind of stuff. And then started producing sport. And that side of it really kind of, you know, I really enjoyed it. And I kind of became a jack of all trades, master of none. But at the time, I'd still never been on air. Still kind of not really kind of had a, you know, I really want to do that. And it was a purely by chance thing of, you know, would you have a go? those questions that you rarely get asked now. And we had a new boss, Graham Ledger, at TFM. And he said, you know, would you have a go? Yeah, I've done everything else, you know. And that was it. And so it was kind of very much by accident rather than design.
So when you did when you had a go for the very first time, did you realize instantly that this is something that you enjoyed?
Yes and no. I mean, God, I was no good at it. You know, I used to script every link. You know, I wasn't a natural. You know, when it came, you know, and I used to listen to the guys at TFM, and they were very natural and very easy, you know, to listen to. And I was thinking, God, how do you do that? So I don't think I was a natural at it, and probably I still think that now. I don't find it a very yeah. I don't. I can talk to people,
Yeah.
But I don't find it a natural thing to do. And I think
Really?
I think that's something that I've worked on over the years. And so just getting that initial chance, it was that, oh yeah, this is all right. This is pretty good. And then again, purely by chance, they offered me one show a week, which is on a Sunday night, called Classic Hits, and I could pick my own music for 3 hours, and it was like, this is brilliant. And this was in around about 1994, something like that. And then I kind of started to get the bug a little bit over kind of the 6 months from when I started. I was thinking, can I actually do this? Can I actually go somewhere with this? And at the same time, I was kind of doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes. And I remember having a chat with Ledge, and he said, look, you're kind of riding two bikes at the minute. You could go into the management side of things, or you could go into being a jock, but, you're going to have to pick one. And straight away, it was just kind of like, yeah, I'll be a jock. It sounds really silly, but it seemed like the easiest thing rather than going into the management side of things. And that's kind of how it developed from there. And I remember getting my first contract because I was working in the office at TFM. So I was doing Monday to Friday, and then I'd work on a night doing, producing the Late Show and stuff like that, and all this kind of stuff. And then suddenly I had to resign from my job as a secretary there to basically become the weekend jock and the main swing jock. And it was great because suddenly I was working just 2 days a week and suddenly getting paid about $5,000 more than I was getting paid working 9 to 5 in the office. And it was great because, I never had that get in it's Friday feeling because I was working the weekend. But then again, I never had, it's Monday morning because I'd worked my working week over the Saturday, Sunday. And so purely by chance, that's kind of how my career was born from there.
So that first contract, was that for a full-time gig or was it the weekend, sorry, and then?
Yeah, it was a year contract, and it was to do Saturday and Sunday breakfast. It was kind of, right. It was bespoke to me because what we would do is I'd come in on a Friday and I'd get everything prepped, and my job was to do Friday night Late Show, which was like all the love shows, as you used to have back then, and playing the love music from 10 through till 1 or 2 in the morning. Then what I would do is I would go home for about 2 hours sleep. I'd get up at 4:30, 5, and then I'd be back to do Saturday morning breakfast. But it would be Bruno at the Millhouse. Do you remember Bruno Brooks? Because Bruno was my hero, and Bruno Brooks was live from the Millhouse, and I had to do the inserts each and every going into the ad breaks for 20 seconds or something like that. So I had to go and do that, and then that finished at 10. Then I was on air 10 till 2, which included like the Northeast chart. And then I'd go from 2 o'clock back into the other studio and produce sport 2 till 6. So it was this massive 12-hour shift. And then I'd go home again, get another couple of hours sleep, and I'd come back in on the Saturday night to do Love Links. Again, the love show. And then that'd finish at kind of 1 or 2 in the morning. I'd go back home, another 2 hours sleep, and I'd get up and I'd do Sunday morning breakfast. And then that was my working week. So I'd cram in all that, sort of from Friday night to Sunday morning. So it was quite a shift, and then I kind of had carte blanche on sort of all the swing work for the main jocks. I was the main cover jock. So you kind of got paid extra with that. So I was loving it. I was thinking, this is amazing. And to be honest, that's when things got like a little hazy because, you'd go out, you'd just get absolutely, mangled on a night out. And ultimately it was, there was no Monday morning feeling, there was no Friday feeling, but then it just got a little hazy where you weren't getting up till like 3 in the afternoon. There was no real kind of sense or direction, After about a year and a half, I was thinking, do you know what? I think I really need to do something with this, and kind of maybe go in a direction, because I remember Ledge turning around to me, and I remember being passed over for daytimes a couple of times. And I think largely it was my inexperience. I wasn't overly brilliant, so I can understand that. But Ledge, very more than politely, said to me, he said, look at it from my point of view. Because I said, look, you passed me up now for daytimes on 2 occasions. And Ledge, bless him, turned around and said, do you know what? He said, look at it from my point of view. I said, what? He said, you can cover every show. And he said, so for me, you're a safe pair of hands, And he said, and I can sleep easy at night, knowing that if there's a problem with anybody, you can, at the drop of a hat, go in and I was like, you kind of go, you bastard. It made complete sense. And, but ultimately it was kind of like not doing myself any career favors. So that's when I kind of applied to Viking, and I'd seen this advert for Viking, which was, I think, about 3 weeks. No, maybe about a week after the closing date had finished, and I rushed a demo out to Mark Matthews, and I got an interview with Mark, and it was just as they were launching Magic, and Mark said, "Well, look, with your voice, you could, you could go across 2 stations, as in terms of, you could have your choice. Would you prefer to work on Magic or Viking?" And again, I was only 20. Sorry, I was a latecomer to radio, so I was kind of 26, 27 at the time, and so I straight away went, Viking. I don't want to be put on Magic just yet. And so from there, I kind of got the gig and went down to Hull.
What was it like broadcasting to your hometown? Because for me, Viking was my hometown, and it was just incredible that your own pals and, your teachers that never thought you'd make anything of yourself, all those people actually heard you become successful. What was that like for you?
Do you know what it was? It was lovely because there is a big kick about, being on your hometown station. And, I'd grown up with Radio, the then Radio Tees, turning into TFM, and then seeing all these great presenters, who I looked up to at the time, the Mark Dennisons, the Nick Wrights, people like that, Nick Piercy, they all sounded fantastic, and so there was an element of that, and also Chris Farrell had come through as well, and Mike Toolin. They just had spent a very brief amount of time at TFM in the mid 90s. So for me, that's when it kind of got exciting, and to have that to have that recognition. I always remember because of course I was going under my real name, because Scott obviously isn't my real name. You know that, yeah? And yeah. So I was going under my real name, which by the way is Derek. Yeah, that's my real name. And so I loved it. We'd go out and we'd kind of go into schools and do the school talks and all that kind of thing. We'd do gigs, I'd do quizzes and all that kind of stuff. And I just always remember being out one night with David Tye, and Tyser was doing mids at the time, and he was doing a gig in Middlesbrough, and I was just having a beer at the back of the bar. And I remember this guy coming in, and he was a big guy, I'm 5'7" in my Cuban heels with a strong wind behind me, and this guy, he was a big shit house, and he was massive, and he looked hard as well. And I just remember seeing this guy, and he went over to Tyser. And the next thing I saw Tyser pointing down towards me, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? and then this guy starts to walk down towards me, just holding my eye contact. And then, you start getting uncomfortable and you start looking around behind you, and I'm thinking, no, there's only the bar staff behind me. And he's really looking at me. And he gets to me. And of course, me only being tiny, the bigger he gets, the closer he gets to me, the bigger he gets. And he turns around to me and he goes, "Are you Derek Makin?" And I thought, well, there's no point in saying no, because David Ty's just literally kind of, pointed me out. And I kind of yeah, I am. And he held out his hand and he shook my hand. He said, "I just want to say thanks." He said, because he said, "You used to read my letters when I was inside." He said an awful lot. He said, "And you'd read my messages from my missus to me." And he said, "And it really got me through." And when you kind of go, whoo. I was like, yeah. I said, "Lovely." And I didn't know what to say. And so I kind of went, "So what were you in for?" And he just, without even blinking, he went, "Armed robbery and assault." And I went, "Well, that's lovely. It's beautiful. Really nice to meet you." I said, and I looked at me watch. I went, "But I've got to go." So it was lovely in that respect, But I didn't, and I absolutely loved it. And I remember being quite good at having to leave TFM, but I also knew that I had to if I wanted to grow as a presenter and also just in the career as well.
We apologise, sir.
We just play a record till 8, 9. When do we finish?
I'm not drunk. I've had a couple of drinks. I'm not drunk. Oh, yeah.
So let's move on to Viking then, Scott. We've had Joel on an episode, Joel Ross, and we talked about we talked about you, and he mentioned the name, and he mentioned that prior to your arrival, there was actually a meeting about what you should, because Derek wasn't quite right for the new young-looking Viking. Yeah. Do you remember the chat about that meeting?
Yeah, I remember distinctively. I remember going into Mel Booth's office. Now, Mel was brilliant as an MD. And then Mark Matthews was just a lovely, lovely guy, and they took me into the office and said, "Look, we want to change your name." And I said, "Look, that's great. Derek, who looks at a baby and goes, you know what, we're going to call him Derek. Ooh, cool baby Derek." And then obviously there was the Derek Makin that as well. So I said, well, look, I'm happy to switch to the Derek part, but can I keep the Makin just so that it's some kind of something to do with me, you know? And of course, Viking, all the other lads had changed their surnames. You know, obviously Joel Ross, Joel Hogg, Jason King was Jason Griffith, Steve Jordan was Steve Dodsworth. So they'd all changed their surnames. So they said, yeah, all right then, okay. And we sat down, I remember, with Mark and Mel, and this meeting I thought was going to go on for maybe half an hour. You know, we were going to throw names into the hats, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And it was, if I remember rightly, it seemed to be literally just like that. And they switched it. And they said, look, we want something short, snappy, American, Australian. And as soon as they said the word Australian, Jason Donovan popped in my head. Right, so Jason Donovan pops in my head. So I got Scott, you know, because that was the character that he played in Neighbours.
Yeah.
So short, snappy, and so I thought, oh, it's going to be a name that we put into the hat. And I remember Mel and Mark just going, Scott Makin, Scott. Yep, that'll do. And I remember Mel just going, yeah, just get the image and sorted like that. And I was like, what? Huh? What? And just like that, they were like, yeah, all right then, Scott Makin. And they took me out into the office. And I thought they were going to, and then they introduced me to the staff, you know, and they took me through the office. And I thought they were going to go, well, this is Derek, but we're going to call him Scott on here. But they didn't. From the word go, they called me Scott. So they're introducing me to people as Scott about 5 minutes after they changed my name. And they're going, well, this is Scott. And people are going, hi, Scott, nice to meet you. And you know when you're confusingly shaking hands, yeah, lovely to meet you. And then I remember kind of meeting a few of the lads as well. And they're going, Scott, we thought of Derek Makin from TFM. No, yeah, that's me. And that's kind of how the Scott side of things was born. But the first few weeks, the staff just must have thought I was the biggest, you know, ignorant, you know, twat going, basically. Because I'd walk through the office and people would go, morning, Scott. And I'd be halfway down the office and I'd go, oh yeah, morning, everyone. But that wasn't the only thing, because for the first 4 weeks at Viking, I still had to finish my weekends at TFM. So,
oh wow!
So I ended up having to have an idiot sheet. It reminded me who I was and where I was. So during the week I was Scott Makin. Weekends I was Derek Makin. During the week I was 96.9 Viking FM. During the weekends I was 96.6 TFM. Today's favourite music, today's best music, North Yorkshire and the Northeast, Lincolnshire and whatever. So I literally had to write an idiot sheet down just to remember, like, basically who I was and where I was. and then from there, it's, you know, I think the weirdest thing only after that was a kid asking me for my autograph. And this was a good few months in, and I had no idea how to write Scott. So I'd never written it in my life. and if you see any signature of mine, I ended up just writing it in capital letters. It's very swish. I've got lots of, like, you know, kind of squiggles and stuff like that to disguise the fact that I couldn't, because I was like, is it one T? Is it two T's? You know? And so that's kind of like where the Scott came from, you know?
So when you went to Viking, was it straight on to mids?
Yeah. It was, yeah. And I was just trying to figure, yeah, because if I remember rightly, Logan was doing breakfast, then I'd do mids, Jay was on afternoons, and then Stevie was on drive, because we were all like 3-hour shows at the time. Yeah. So I think because it was the top 10 at 10. Yeah. The top 10. So I'd do the top 10 at 10, and then I think Jay was on 1 till 4, Stevie was on 4 till 7. And of course, Joel wasn't even kind of around. I think initially he was doing overnights, you know, and there was Cameron on the evening show.
It's interesting, Scott, you talk about Cameron, because as much as I thought you were incredible on air, I thought Cameron was good. I used to really enjoy. He was a bit left field, wasn't he? But he was a great jock.
He was a fantastic jock, but like you say, he was left field. He was very relatable. He was very easy, and he made it an easy listen, kind of in the respect that he was very one-to-one. You know, he was very personal. He wasn't the standard. He could jock it up, but he somehow had this natural, you know, kind of South Yorkshire knack of just being one-to-one. And yeah, good lad, great lad actually, Cameron. But again, Paul Higginbottom, if I remember rightly.
Oh, really?
Is Cameron's real name. Somebody might correct me on that, but yeah. But it was a great time. You know, I mean, he'd come in with Logan on breakfast, I always remember one of Simon's, like, when Simon would have a bit of a meltdown, and we had Chris the cleaner as well. I don't know if Joel touched on Chris the cleaner. And Chris was lovely. She was one of the nicest people ever. And she was just a woman in a kind of probably mid-50s, and she was the cleaner, and she'd wait outside the studio until Simon had finished the link, and Simon would be like, wind up the next. And for whatever reason, if the link had gone wrong or he wasn't happy for it, she'd open the airlock after his mic went off, and he'd end up like throwing a pencil at her or a pen, and he'd go, fucking hell, and she'd go, oh, Simon, what's wrong? And she was just so accommodating, And but it was just a really nice time. But and then Mark Matthews, he left us not long after, and then we got Paul in. We got Apple Saunders in, and then Andy Robson as well. Andrew Robson came in as boss. So we went through a couple of boss changes, but it was just a great time, John. It was just everything about it. We had to be honest, I was the oldest out of the lot of them by maybe about easily 5-6 years. So I didn't kind of ingratiate myself because they all lived in Viking villas, outside right next to the marina. And I purposely, I didn't want that. I didn't want to be able to see work when I moved down there. So I moved to the foreshore, Hesel foreshore. And so when I moved there, people go, where do you live? And I said, Hesel foreshore. And they're like, oh, really? And I said, there's nothing oh really about it, and there certainly wasn't anything oh really about it when they found the dead body one afternoon when I went back home, and they were scooping this guy out of the silt. That was it. There's nothing oh really, but I had a great time down there, and just the lads, they were so just normal, just really just having a good time, and so it took me a while to get used to, not get used to settle myself down there, because I was coming back twice a week to do a quiz at a pub in Borough, and I'd come back most weekends as well. And so it took me a long time before I kind of would settle. It probably maybe the best part of a year before I properly settled in. And then, like you say, in the end, I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go home.
There's a couple of things about your time at Viking which I've written down in front of me. First is Club 2000. I remember that you used to DJ Club 2000 in Scully, didn't you? Yeah,
it was just a big room, wasn't it? Club 2000.
It was,
just, it was because we used to have all the live nights at Viking, which was a great idea. So Wednesday night, you'd be live from the waterfront for the over 25s night. Thursday night, we were at Club 2000 in Scunthorpe, then the Gallery in York, and then Friday night, it was from Cleethorpes. So it was a great idea, a great way of getting out there and doing everything live. So I ended up doing that, but I'll be honest with you, it was JK who did the music for me. I literally just put it on CD and was like, yeah, that's great.
No.
Yeah. I mean, he was the proper DJ, I was just literally the figurehead, but so I did that for a little while. But the best part about it, I had no idea that one night Judge Jules was playing in Henry Africa's. And this is, I mean, they used to nickname me Delamitri because I was always the last to know about everything. And I had no idea. And there was this, I think it was a little piece in, I don't know, whatever, the Scunthorpe Gazette or the Scunthorpe Times or whatever the hell it was. And there was a little bit about me having more people in my club than Judge Jules having in Henry Africa's.
You'll have that, Scott. You'll have that.
So I'll take that. Yeah, I'll take that. And we did. I mean, we had great trips to Amsterdam, like listener trips to Amsterdam, things like that. Lots of stories, of course, that we can't tell. Generally involving Joel. But it was just a great time. Absolutely loved it.
If my memory serves me correctly, didn't you? Well, you were part of the full Monty at the Tower nightclub.
Yeah, of course. It was the time when the movie came out and everybody was doing the full Monty. Whether it was firemen, other emergency services, or just normal workmen, builders, and everybody was just doing this. So they came up with the idea of doing the full Monty at the Tower. And of course, John, you'll know the Tower, the Tower for an hour, and the Tower was it was as rough as a badger's ass, but it was a great place. And they said, right, we're going to do the full Monty. So there was me, Joel, and Jace, and we had to learn this dance routine to Tom Jones. You Can Leave Your Hat On, and but we got a strip troupe, a proper strip troupe, to do a full on show as well. Because obviously, it'd be pointless just us doing a 3-minute song. so there was these big ass guys doing the full on show, and I think the first lot of tickets that were sold, I think there might have been something like 500 tickets sold. And we videoed it as well, and we had people, that kind of gone down the line of the video, and all the women were, excited to see the Centurions. No, we've come to see the Viking lads. All right then. And I remember distinctly, Joe was off his nut. He was absolutely off his nut. So we had to stick him in the middle, right? And I think if there's bound to be a video somewhere. And I always remember just having to scream at him to tell him, like, take your jacket off now, because we had our sunglasses on and everything like that. And Joe was literally just in the middle bouncing his head. He was absolutely out of it. And and then right at the end, because I remember Mel Booth going, I'll give you an extra 30 quid if you go all the way. 30 quid? Are you winding me up, Mel? You want me to get my knob out? No, I'm good. I'm all right. Thanks very much indeed. So it gets to the point at the end of the song, right? And, we did the reveal, and I think we just had I don't know what the hell it was. It was just like a pair of undies on or whatever. But Joel, being absolutely off his nut, decides to go all the way. And he gets his knob out, right? And he literally stands. And you remember, like, the little, there was like the wrought iron bars on the front of the stage. Yeah. Stands up on the stage and he waves his cock around like, hey! and because it was getting videoed, they just superimposed the tiniest Viking logo. And it was brilliant. And then we ended up doing it again. I don't know, a couple of weeks later, a month or so later. And I think we sold about another 300 tickets. So I think it was the best part of 1,000 women there compared to about the 500 the first time round. And yeah, it was just it was a time. But again, we were back in our 20s. A good few stone lighter. We'd be, I'd hit the gym regularly. We were playing five-a-side regularly, so I didn't feel too bad at that point. So it's just your. Honestly, if you see the video, his head's bouncing. He had his curtains. He had that curtain haircut. Head's bouncing away, and it's like literally lolling everywhere. And we just had to keep it right. We just had to keep it right. It was just excellent. Take your belt off. Take your t-shirt off. But and then, like, me and Jason went off, and Joel just decides to get his knob out. That was brilliant.
I genuinely think there'll be a lot of people listening now considering whether they'd get their tackle out for 30 quid. I don't even think it wasn't even around 50, or even 100. It was for an extra 30 quid. No, Mel, what are you doing? What are you doing? But no, I mean, we had a absolutely brilliant time. But that was the great thing with Hull. I always found that with the people there, is that they were so welcoming. They were so lovely and warm. You'd go into the supermarket and you could be absolutely anybody, and they'd just chat to you. They were so welcoming. Yeah. And I loved that about the place. I absolutely loved it. I remember one time though when I didn't really do so well, and it was off the back of an awards. When we used to do our national awards, and I think we were owned by EMAP at the time. Yeah. And it was in Manchester, and this was 1997, so it was my first proper awards, and we'd all been drinking since about 4 or 5 o'clock in the bar, and naturally, of course, it went all the way through. And they wouldn't let me have Saturday breakfast off. They didn't have anybody, I think, to cover me for Saturday breakfast. So I had to get a taxi back to do Saturday breakfast. So I stopped drinking at about 1, 2, and I got a taxi back at 3. And I was really, Sir Rolly Birkin, I was very, very drunk going on air. And just those moments where you'd pull your mic down and go, did I just say fuck? Did I say fuck? I don't think I did. But I'm not quite sure if I did or if I didn't. Right, and there was many a times like that, but I remember distinctly this one. And it was also the day that Borough were in the FA Cup final against Chelsea, right? So I had a real plan, bear in mind, massively hungover, very little sleep. But I also had to do this gig straight after my show, which was launching the Hull Sharks new strip for the following season. So I'd done the show, Saturday breakfast, went back home, got showered again,
and then went back into the city centre. And what's it place? The shopping centre with the
Princess Quay.
Yeah, Princess Quay. And it was in the Princess Quay. And I remember John Bradley. John was our sports guy at the time, and he'd written me a load of notes which I'd not even bothered to read. Right, so he'd write a little bit about put the player, the position, and then a little note for me to kind of like just all right, okay. So the Hull Sharks were modelling the kit, and so I was down on the bottom, and they were coming down the escalators, and the 2 or 3 tiers in the Princess Quay, absolutely chocker, Hull Sharks, blah, 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 massive round of applause for each and every player. Gets to the final one, it was the captain. Can't remember his name, but I remember him being I think he was a Kiwi, and he'd gotten to the point where, like you say, I was just reading John's little side notes pretty much verbatim, I'd not even checked through it. Gets to the final lad, and he's the captain of the Hull Sharks, monster of a guy. And as he's coming down, the escalator, I said, so-and-so, the captain of the Hull Sharks, massive round of applause. And then I go to read John's bit, right? And John had put, and I just went, yeah, so-and-so, well, captain of the Hull Sharks. Yeah, but of course, not only does he play like a bulldog, but he looks, oh. And John had just put, not only does he play like a bulldog, but he looks like one. And I just said this, but apart from looks like I'd got to the looks, and it was just, oh yeah, not only of course does he play like a bulldog, but he looks. And I just wasn't, and you could just see this big gasp, first from me on my mic, and then the audience, and then this Hull Shark player coming down. Fair play to him, he took it all in his stride and had a gesture, and I'll see you later. I was like, all right then, okay. So there are those moments when you think I must do better. It must be a little bit more. And then the worst part about it, I had to drive straight to Borough and watch the FA Cup final. And of course, that was the 41 seconds in, and Robert Di Matteo hit the first goal for Chelsea, and that was it. So it was an awful day all round. But yeah, good memories, good times.
Oh yeah.
So let's go on to the next station. So we've talked about your love for Viking and what it was like, that the team, you were all really close knit. You're a really close team. So you moved to Radio Air next. Was that your choice, or was that an EMAP choice?
No, I didn't. I came back to TFM. So from Viking, I went back to TFM, and that was a personal choice because my daughter had been born in Hull, and it was just at the time when everybody was starting to kind of splinter off, and Joel and Jason were heading over to Manchester, and I think a couple of people behind the scenes like Lee Thompson and people like that were starting to move on as well. So I was thinking, do you know what? Maybe it's time for me. And I kind of put the feelers out back at TFM, and Andy Robson was great because Andy, when the TFM turned around and said, well, look, we'd be more than happy to take you, and Andy, and I mentioned this to Andy, and he was lovely. He said, well, look, make sure it's the right deal for you, that it's secure for you. So I managed to kind of like negotiate a good 2-year deal, and I moved back to Middlesbrough. And so I spent a couple of years, but very, very quickly got bounced around the schedules. And it was kind of very truculent time, just a very turbulent time, people getting moved left, right and centre. And very, very quickly, it was kind of, I got moved off daytimes. And they said, look, well, we're going for a younger sound. And I'd always known that I'd got an older sounding voice. And of course, it was at the time when, the PDs were only kind of in their early to mid 20s, that kind of thing, So they were very much kind of focused on the young. And I said, okay. So I ended up doing the late show at TFM. And then I got quickly bounced onto the Magic Late Show, which was right across the northeast. And then you're thinking, oh, God, okay, then right, fair enough. And then I was under Colin Patterson at the time, and Colin didn't really rate me, and he'll probably admit to that. And so my time was up at TFM sort of around 2004, and ended up going to Magic up at Metro, and so I ended up doing afternoons there for about 1.5 years, something like that, and then from there. It was a big difference because I ended up going to do Century FM Breakfast. So of course that was regional as well, and right across the northeast. So that was real kind of like interesting time, considering I'd never wanted to do breakfast, and I've never had any plans on doing breakfast, or anything like that. That was a really strange and interesting time.
I was going to ask about the breakfast thing, and you've just completely blown my research out of the water. So I apologise for that. But you do breakfast on Century, and I remember that because you really have honed your craft into being a really strong music jock. So then for someone to say, will he take over the breakfast show? That must have taken some thinking.
Well, no, because they doubled my salary. So,
all right, okay, yes, I'll do it.
No, genuinely, it was a really weird thing because I also knew that Century was going through some changes as well, you know, and I think they were looking for it was almost, it came across as if they were looking for jocks across the board. And now, bear in mind, at the time, geographically, Metro was based on one side of the Tyne Bridge, Century was based on the other side of the Tyne Bridge. And so I literally came out of Metro, just walked over the Tyne Bridge and went for a chat with Owen, because Owen Ryan had just become boss at Century. And it just wasn't working, you know. I mean, it's the first time I'd ever been asked to go in and do a demo. And just like what you were saying at the beginning, you know, you can hear more of my northeast accent. When me and Owen were chatting, he said, I love that borough accent. He said, I love that. He said, but when you go in, you know, to do your thing, he said, you become very jock and almost very generic. And he said, I want that borough guy. And I said, Owen, don't get me wrong. I said, I've kind of worked all that accent out because at the time accents weren't really in, you know. Yeah. And I said, so I'd kind of worked it out. So when I went on the mic, when I went on air, your kind of natural jock, you know, comes in. He went, no, he said, I really want the borough guy. And I was struggling. I went in for about 3 or 4 demos. And in the end, he said, look, he said, I'm going to put you in with Lisa Shaw just to kind of relax you. And I just want to kind of hear you be you know. And me and Lisa didn't know each other. And so we did these couple of demos and we really hit it off, you know, like a house on fire. And that was very much when the real me, you know, I'd been kind of this jock on air for 10 years at that point or so, maybe a little more, but it was the real me that was coming out finally, just in conversation, you know. And then that was it. And I got offered breakfast and it was really weird. I knew I was going to get offered something, but I thought it would have been, you know, another day part. And and I remember going in and meeting Andy McPherson. And do you know Andy? Have you spoken to Andy?
No, I haven't.
Andy's a complete poker face, you know. And I only met him a couple of times, and Andy was Owen's boss. And I remember being sat in the boardroom opposite the pair of them. Now, bearing in mind, I'd not long since lost my mum, and you know, you're kind of going through that. You know, I've done 4 demos. You know, any other time I'd have probably jumped through hoops, I'd have kissed ass, anything. All I wanted, I was like, just fucking make your mind up. You know, do you want me? Don't you want me? You know, that I was in that, and that's really not me. You know, that's really not me. So I remember Andy McPherson turned around, and it was more so Owen's face because Owen was sat right next to him. And Andy Mac says, Scott, what do you bring to the table? Now, again, any other time, I'd have bullshitted my way, I'd have waxed lyrical, like you say. And at this point, I just thought, do you know what? I'm going to tell you the truth. I said, I'll be honest, Andy. I said, not a great deal. I said, you know, and straight away, Owen's face just dropped. And I said, my career's in mids. I said, you know, I've done a lot of weekend breakfast and stuff like that. I said, but I'm largely a, you know, mids jock. I said, I'll be honest with you. I said, my voice doesn't really kick in till probably about 11. And I'm not really that creative. Right? So,
Jesus.
And I could see Owen's face was just thinking, what the fuck are you doing? You know, but Andy Mac's face didn't flinch. He didn't flicker one iota. And to this day, I don't know if he thought, is he winding me up? Is he being honest with me? And I thought, well, I'm just going to tell you, you know. And anyway, they still offered it to me. And it was co-host with Lisa, you know, it was co-host with Lisa Shaw. And they told me, you know, they kind of doubled my salary. And again, I've never been one of these presenters to play hardball. But I thought, you know what, it's probably going to be my one and only shot to maybe try and do it. So I knocked them back. Right, at this point, I'm thinking, what the fuck are you doing? So I went, no, do you know what? I'm going to have a bit of time to think about it. I said, but I've got 2 young kids, you know, and my ex-wife at the time, you know, I said, she might have to give up work, you know. So, and I went, can you give me a little bit of time to think about it, you know? Yeah, sure, you know. So I remember coming out of Century, and I remember driving under the Tyne Bridge to the quayside, and I remember ringing my dad. Now, my dad never swore. My dad was very old school. And he said, how'd it go? I said, they've offered me the job. He said, that's brilliant, son. He said, good money. I said, they've offered to double my wage. Unbelievable. When do you start? I went, I've turned them down. He went, you fucking done what? I was like, and I went, yeah. And he went, oh, what, you know. So anyway, and I remember kind of going back, and they rang me about an hour later to say, well, look, you know, we'll offer you, you know, we'll put in an extra couple of grand, but we'll give you radar bonuses as well. So I went, yeah, all right then. And I remember when it was announced to like the staff at Metro, and I remember John Kane. John was a jock at Magic at the time, and I'd known John for years from his I mean, John had been a Radio Tees and TFM jock, and he'd been on Magic. He was just a stalwart across the beam and everything. And I remember John coming up to me, and there was no, you know, you couldn't take it with offence because he was just being honest. And I went, yeah, no. And he says to me, mate, you know, when it was announced, he went, mate, he said, you know, you're a good jock, but you're not a breakfast jock. I went, John, I've told them that. But in the end, we had 3 great years. You know, we kind of, our figures ended up being absolutely great, you know, and so, yeah, and it was, and you know, got to do with just a wonderful woman.
Did you enjoy doing breakfast?
Yeah, but I mean, it was nice because we had our show started at 5:30. It didn't start at 6. It started at 5:30. So, and I lived in Redcar. So this was in Newcastle. So I'd get up at 3:30, get in the shower, take about 45 minutes to drive up, get up there for 5. And then we'd be on air kind of 5:30 till 9. And it was great, you know, and I remember it was the softest launch because, you know, nobody, I wasn't a big name or anything like that. And I remember Owen saying to me, all I want you to do is just go in there, be you. And I remember their main game at the time was Battle of the Sexes at 8:15.
Yeah.
And he said, I just want you to wind people up. And I said, well, that's not really me. He went, no. He said, just cheat, you know. And so I said, all right then, okay. So we were doing this like Battle of the Sexes game, and I would, you know, blatantly cheat. Well, of course, that was it. It was just like lighting a touch paper. Oh, you know, this is so much better with just Lisa Shaw. You know, we don't like it. And so it was lovely. It was a joy, considering I'd never planned or never wanted really to do breakfast. And so I did 2 years with Lisa, and then me and Ben Weston did a year together as well. And when I got canned, I never missed it. I've never fancied doing breakfast again. It's never really interested me. You know, I've done Saturday breakfast teas for quite some time, but that was a different thing altogether. You know, it was much more relaxed, and there wasn't the pressure that there was there. So I never planned, never started to or wanted to do breakfast like a lot of people do. And I remember Ben. I think Ben kind of still had that yearning to. He said, you know, I don't feel like I've got it out of my system. You know, I want to do a little bit more. And I was like, no, I'm done. You know, I'm quite happy. You know, and then from there, I went back to Metro and TFM.
You spend a bit of time there. Where's next after that?
Well, Andy Robson at this point had moved to BBC Newcastle, and you know, I left Century in the October of 2008, and I wasn't allowed to work in the Northeast for about 3 months, and then I ended up just being kind of weekend breakfast and cover jock on Metro and TFM. And so I was doing that. And then Andy got in touch. And I'd done some work at BBC Tees as well, you know, in the interim. And as long as me and Andy had known each other, we got together, and he said, you know what? He said, if I'd not heard you on Tees, I wouldn't have realised that you could have done, you know, so much speech. Yeah. And so we started talking because he was looking to replace Mids on BBC Newcastle. And he offered me the gig at Newcastle, and I initially accepted. And so I then went back to the bosses at TFM and said, "Look, guys, you know, thanks very much for the last few months, but BBC Newcastle have offered me this." And I got a call that night and off Trevor Elliott, and Trevor said, "Have you signed anything?" I said, "No." I said, "Not yet." I said, "You know, but look, there's something coming back up at TFM in the next few months." And I said, "Look, you know, I've been at TFM twice, you know, and being there, got the T-shirt. I'd love to do a little bit more speech, you know, particularly off the back of doing breakfast, where you get to talk a little bit more." Yeah. And he said, "Just have a think about it." And it was bizarre because of all the things that won out in the end, it was geography. Because for sort of 5 years, I'd been driving up to Newcastle, and it was like a 100-mile round trip. Sort of 3 years at kind of certainly doing Century, and then the 2 years previous to Metro and Metro and Magic. It was kind of a 5-year, 100-mile round trip, and it was simple geography. And I ended up turning it down. I said, had it been BBC Tees, I'd have jumped at it. I said, but I'm going to go to TFM. And Andy was lovely because, Andy, if you know Andy, he's just brutally honest. And he said, I think you're making the wrong decision. He said, but fair enough, And then so I went back to TFM at the age of 41. Now, bearing in mind, this is 10 years after being taken off air for being too old. So that had really lodged with me, And it was really, so it was a real hard mental block to get over because you're thinking, I'm 41 and I'm going back to TFM. And then it was having to kind of learn to jock again because you'd been used to double heading and just kind of learning to be solo jock again. And so I ended up doing 3 years there. And I remember saying to Alex, my boss at the beginning, I said, look, when it comes to not renewing my contract, just give me as much notice as you can. So 3 years later, he turns around and he goes, mate, they're not going to renew your contract. And he gave me about 4 months notice, right? So I was like, all right, then fair enough, no worries. And in the end, I was just like, will you just put me on gardening leave? He said, nope, you got to work it all the way through. And then by that time, Owen Ryan had spent some time in Australia for a few years and he'd come back and he was the boss at Hallam. And Owen said, come in for a chat. And he offered me the gig of mids at Hallam. So I literally left TFM on the Friday, the day my contract finished, and started Hallam on the Monday. So in one respect, it kind of looks as if I'd got a bit of a promotion and gone to a massive station. In reality, I just wasn't getting my contract renewed, and by accident, ended up at Hallam. And so that was driving 210-mile round trip, 6 days a week.
No, so you didn't move to Sheffield?
No, I attempted to kind of stay over a couple of nights a week, but of course back then the mid show was 5 hours long, right? And I was like,
blimey, yeah,
5 hours, what? And I was going, well, if you listen to Radio 2, I said the day doesn't move for a Hallam listener. So if you listen to Radio 2, I said I come on at 10 o'clock. I said, you're half an hour into Ken Bruce. I said, by the time I come off, you're an hour into Steve Rice. I said, your day doesn't move. And anyway, they end up shorting it to the usual 4 hours. But so then I was thinking, I'll just stay over a couple of nights a week. But then you'd check into a travel lodge and you're thinking, I could have been home in an hour's time, And I quite enjoy driving, but it was a 105-mile trip there, 105-mile trip back, and of course it was 6 shows a week. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then it just started to take its toll a little bit. And of all the stations, Alpha, A1, whatever the hell it was called, the little small station in Darlington that it used to be, they got in touch and said, would you be interested in coming? I said, yeah, all right then, okay. So all that got sorted and I put in my notice to leave Hallam. Hallam brought in Simon Morrican for me. And at the 11th hour, what's it called? What's it called now? Alpha. I can't remember the name of the station. They pulled the offer on me because I think the new boss there had been told how much financial difficulty they were in. And suddenly I was literally left without a gig, And I rang Owen in this blind panic and he went, and I went, Owen, and he was like, what? And I said, they pulled the rug. And I went, is Simon definitely coming? He went, mate, he signed his contract. He's starting like when you leave, And fair play to Owen, he kind of pulled my nuts out of the fire. He said, look, bear with me. He said, and I'll get back in touch with you next week. And purely by chance, Rich Williams was leaving Radio Air to go to Heart. And so I got drive at Radio Air again by chance. And so my drive was a little bit shorter from 210 miles a day to a 150-mile round trip.
Jesus.
And so I ended up at Radio Air for just over 3 years, 3.5 years. And then I went back onto mids as well. So I had a great time at Radio Air. It was just nice.
You spent a lot of time at EMAP, Scott. Yeah. We haven't brushed upon, I think we did, but not enough, the EMAP Awards, which anybody who's been with an EMAP, I have to ask the question of your experience of the EMAP Awards.
Yeah, they were legendary. As you know, they were absolutely legendary. I mean, particularly the EMAP Awards, because they would throw money at it left, right, and centre. Their receptions were fantastic. You'd go into, I remember the Ponds Forge at Sheffield a few times, And the way they did it out was fantastic. You know, you'd go in and there'd be a different theme every year. One theme was kind of, I think it might have been Greek gods, and everybody that was serving you were in togas and all that. Another year, it was a nuclear theme for some reason. So people serving you in kind of gas masks and kitted out in these suits, you know.
I remember that one.
Do you remember that? And it was just really,
so.
and I remember, you know, at one point kind of, was it D Ford being kind of arriving? No, it was D Ford arriving on the side saddle on a Harley, being weaved in and out the audience, and then I think it might have been Tim Schoonermaker arriving in the bucket of a JCB one year. It was just bizarre. So it was literally everything was thrown at it. And I remember my first one going in there, you know, and they'd have all the photographers dressed as the old 30s photographers with the trilbies on and the Rain Max, you know. But it was this assault on the senses going into the awards, where it was a cross for me between a concert and a football match. You know, the noise, you know, and the lights would be going around, you know, everybody would be trying to outshout each other. And then, of course, you'd have the stars of the day popping up going, hey, everybody at EMAP, you know, have a great night, you know, thanks for playing the song. And I think that the one that sticks out in particular is when we were in Viking, and there was a couple of girls on reception. One of them was Amanda, and Boys Home were huge at the time. And and I remember kind of Robbie Williams was linking it all. So he was kind of linking everybody in. And the final person to link in was Ronan Keating. And, you know, so it cuts to the video screens. He goes, hey, everybody at EMAP, you know, blah. We're just about to go on stage. And I just want to say thanks very much indeed, you know, for this wonderful award, blah. And he went, oh, fuck it, I'll come out. And he was behind the stage because they were playing at the arena, Sheffield Arena, just over the road. And I always remember, so everybody was like, you know, and I just remember I think it was Amanda from Viking, and she was absolutely whammoed, you know, completely whammoed. Well, she just went for him. She absolutely sprinted at Ronan Keating, and it was kind of like watching Roadrunner hit a wall when she came up against his Minder, you know, and she just absolutely went for him, and Minder just put his hand out, and she just went, you know, and yeah, those lovely moments, and where the bins were filled from bottom to top in Budweiser, you know, plenty of wine on the table. Then you get your bacon and sausage sarnies at 12 o'clock, you know, and it was just, and then you were paid to stay over, you know, they'd buy you a room. And so it was just great times, you know, and lots of shenanigans.
We're having a party. Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about now then. So after Radio Air, you eventually join the dark side. You go to the BBC.
Yeah.
Which I did in my career. I left Signal One and attempted to get into the BBC full time. Didn't quite cut the mustard. But I always described it to my pals as it's a little bit like rugby league and rugby union. So commercial being rugby league, a bit rough and ready, and rugby union being the BBC, where it's just a bit more shirt and tie as you're drinking your brandy in the clubhouse. So how was it Andy Robson who eventually got you into the BBC?
No, actually, strangely, no. It was John Foster. And genuinely, if it hadn't been for John leaving, I probably wouldn't have been here, actually. And John kind of put my name forward, I think, a couple of times. And it was Sarah Carter. Sarah's up at BBC Newcastle now. And Sarah was based here at the time. And, you know, she got in touch. And Dan Thorpe, who's still here, is the editor. So, and just asked me, you know, would I be interested in doing covering a couple of Saturday breakfasts? You know, I said, yeah, you know, terrific, you know. But I'd never, again, the BBC had never been on my radar. I'd always been in commercial. So it never even crossed my mind, never even occurred to me to come to the Beeb or even try to come to the Beeb. And so at that point in my career, leaving Radio Air, and I said to Em, my other half, I said, you know what? I said, I think I'm pretty much done, you know, and I've had a good run, you know, I've kind of been consistently in work for 25 years, you know, it's not bad going, you know, I've had a great run. You know, it feels like I've got my bus fare home, I've had a great day out, thanks very much indeed. So yeah, and so that's how it felt. And so coming to the Beeb, and then kind of doing a little bit more, kind of depping in for daytimes, you know, Mike Parr and people like that at the time, you know, and Gary Phillipson at the time. So I do a lot of deps, and you know, so I'd said to them, look, you know, if there's anything coming up, you know, will you kind of throw my hat in the ring? And they were like, yeah, you know, but and it was strange, you know, and it took a little while. I think I was here about 18 months before I got the afternoon gig full time, and It is strange because obviously in commercial radio, time is money and everything is kind of done there and then, decisions are made there and then. Where typically as the Beeb, of course, it's not. And that's the bit that I found really weird, was that it was kind of, it felt like manana, that sometimes decisions weren't made as quick or as, as decisive or anything like that. So that's the bit I think that I found strange, maybe sometimes a little bit frustrating. You're kind of like, oh, okay then. but it's like anything else. You adapt, don't you? You learn to adapt, and I think that was it. And then of course their music policy. They were starting to introduce more new music, newer artists and stuff that was in the charts a little bit more. So it didn't seem to have that stigma that maybe it once had, if being a bit of a fuddy-duddy kind of station. And certainly Tees has always had kind of a younger playlist as well. So from that point of view, it's been great. And then of course, we went through this really rough time in the last year, and that was difficult. That was really, really difficult.
Yeah, I bet.
And you couldn't agree with it. But, certainly if you're on this side of the fence, you couldn't agree with it. But that's just the way it was. And, sadly, it lost a lot of people. A lot of people chose to leave. A lot of people didn't get what they wanted. I was very lucky to kind of get the gig that I'm doing now. But it was also at the expense of somebody else who you knew. So you couldn't really celebrate. You didn't feel, oh, great, get in, because you knew that somebody else had to make way, And so you've got to be aware of that. But since kind of doing this new show, we've had very much a positive reaction. So it's been lovely in that respect. I was expecting a lot more negativity, but it's been really, really nice. But we'll just see how it goes.
It's a completely different skill doing what you're doing now, because I remember when I was first asked to cover the breakfast show on BBC WM, and I turned up at 5 o'clock in the morning to meet the 57 producers, which I certainly wasn't used to. And I went in there, and I'd not been on breakfast for some time. I'd been booted from Signal, and I was really excited. A fat kid in a sweet shop type thing, and I remember walking in. I'd not really listened to their breakfast show before, if I'm being deadly honest, Scott. And I was like, right, I've got some cracking ideas. We'll do a phone in, a funny one about, I can't remember, standing in dog poo and stuff, and blah 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 blah. And they're like, no, it's all planned, and it's 90-minute speech. And I'm like, it's what? Jesus, what?
Yeah. What, without music? What? What's all that
Where's
about?
the ads? I need the ads.
Yeah, it is. I think, looking back, and when you say, the difference, between commercial and the Beeb, it certainly was a baptism of fire, joining the Beeb. But I think it's going to be like that anywhere that you go, whether it was going from the Beeb to commercial or vice versa, there was always going to be that gear change. And but like I say, it's one of those where you adapt. We're lucky enough to, I have a fantastic producer in Donna, and there's some great people that work in the building as well, and some that have worked here donkey's years. What's lovely is to see the young'uns come through now. And it's really, really lovely to see, these kids that have kind of, I don't know, they've done their degrees and stuff like that, and they've got that glint in their eye, and they've got that want, and it's lovely. It really is nice to see. Don't get me wrong, I would hate to think that I was getting into radio now, particularly, and I think how difficult it must be compared to when we first got into it. But it's lovely to see that little kind of enthusiasm and that kind of, yeah, we want to do that. When you go, yeah, go for it, see what you can do. See what you can do. And I mean, one of the girls here, she's just got a gig down in the Midlands for Newsbeat. And she was one of our apprentices. And she's 21, something like that. And you think, get in there, good for you. Just enjoy the ride. So I think it's brilliant. It's lovely to see that now.
You know what's really nice? That you for the last hour, you've been talking about your career, and throughout the whole hour, you've done it with a smile on your face. So it sounds to me like you've gone through your radio career just loving it.
I think I've been really lucky, to be honest, John. I think, like I said to you at the beginning, I think there's part of me at times there's part of me thinks that I've stolen somebody's life, because I didn't want to, because I didn't want to be in radio since I was an embryo. I kind of fell into it by, accident rather than design. There is part of me thinking that, I've been very, very lucky to stay in constant work for 30 years. And I have loved it. I've always said it beats working for a living, I know what it is like to kind of go in a shirt and tie, and not have the radio on, that kind of thing. And now to come in and you go, what do you do? I know people who really have to graft for a living, really had to do it. I see far more talented presenters than I could ever hope to be that have gone by the wayside and that have left radio, and so you kind of go, all right, I'm still here, and I've always said, until the talent police come knocking on the door and go, right there, Makin, you've had your time, go and do one, then I'll do it for as long as I can.
I started the pod by saying that I wanted to share the story of the first time I met you, because you were my hero Viking, which we've talked about, and I remember when I got offered the weekend overnight gigs at Viking, and I was doing my first ever show. So it was Saturday morning, 1 a.m. till 7 a.m. I mean, what a beast of a show that was. And I didn't know what to expect. I was really nervous that I'd meet any of you, especially yourself, because I thought you were incredible on air. And I remember my first show doing the show with a shirt and tie on, because I thought that I had to dress smart and I just looked like an absolute tit. And it was about 3 minutes to 7, and you were doing Saturday morning breakfast, and I knew you were coming. So the last hour of that show was horrendous for me, because I was getting really nervous to meet you. And you walked in with a leather jacket on, and you had a cap on, and you walked in and you went, "Hey, nice to meet you, Scott." And I was like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, nice to meet you too, mate." And you walked in, and I remember I'd just done that beast of a show, my first ever professional gig. And you walked in, and it was your turn to take over. You took your jacket off, you flung your cap off, you kind of pre-faded the mic, and you're like, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then you looked at the mic, and this memory will never leave me to the day I die, because one of my radio heroes did this. You looked at the mic, and I'd been broadcasting with the microphone the wrong way round for 7 hours. You turned it. But the beautiful thing is, Scott, is you turned it round, but you didn't say anything to me like, what the have you been doing? You've been broadcasting. You just smiled and then cracked on. You put up in the mic and off you went. But I was like, oh, please, no.
Oh, man, it doesn't matter. It happens to us all. At times, things like that happen to us all. Oh, man, honestly. Do you know what? I do remember us meeting. I don't remember that particular thing, but I do remember that morning, coming in that morning and meeting you for the first time. I actually do remember that as well. And it's weird, isn't it? What you remember, what you forget. And equally, other people's take on maybe that same event or that same memory just has a little bit of a different thing. But yeah, I think all in all, like I say, I count myself lucky and thankful to have, to have kind of done this for as long as I have done. And I'm at an age now, I'm kind of mid-50s now, to say, do you know what? I've had a great time. And it is, and it's the. It is. I've had a great time. I got my bus fare home. Thanks very much indeed. And if that's how it ends, and if it ends tomorrow, then it ends tomorrow. I'll go and push trolleys around Tesco equally as happy. I've had a good run, and I genuinely can't complain, John. There's no. When it ends or however it ends, I've got no animosity, I've got no axe to grind or anything like that. I'll just happily walk away and go, yeah, thanks very much indeed. That's it.
Now, Scott, just one more question, because I've taken up so much of your time, and this will mean nothing to anybody listening to the episode right now, but you've done this podcast straight after your show, so I appreciate you talking for another hour and a bit.
Well, my voice is a little bit hoarse, so apologies.
I love it. It's doing it for me, Scott. But I ask my guests on Crunch and Roll who they would like to hear with their very own episode on this Crunch and Roll podcast. Who would it be for you?
Have you done JK yet?
Well, do you know what? He said yes, and now he's gone quiet. So I'm thinking of sending a death threat through the letter, and that's a joke, by the way.
See, JK or Bruno Brooks, I'd like to hear, because he was my radio hero. So I'd like to hear Bruno. And I was lucky enough to work with him very, very briefly in the 90s at TFM because he came to do the Late Show. And I was lucky enough to go down to his house for about a week in Hungerford and produce the Late Show from there, and kind of went into his studio and, you know, and kind of saw his gotcha and all of his discs that he'd been presented with, the Smash Hits Paul Winners DJ of the Year, you know, going into his downstairs loo. And while I was there, stood having a pee, looking there, and there's a picture of him with Paul and Linda McCartney, and thinking, yeah, this is the life.
Amazing.
So anybody like that, JK, I'd love to hear, definitely. And certainly maybe Bruno Brooks, if you can get Bruno.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time. It has been lovely to catch up with you after so many years.
Well, thanks very much. Honestly, John, it's been an absolute pleasure. It really has. And I can only apologise if my memory maybe isn't as clear as some of the other lads as well. And they go, no, it didn't happen like that whatsoever at all. But it did to me. And I've had an absolute blast kind of going down memory lane with you. So thanks very much indeed for taking the time and showing an interest in somebody who really hasn't done much, to be honest. And people are going, Scott Mills, is he on? Is he on? Scott Mills? No, it's just me. It's just me.
Are you all right to take us away with the end credits, please, Scott?
I am indeed. Right, here we go. You've been listening to Crunch and Roll with me, Scott Makin. Subscribe on your favourite podcast app to get every new episode as soon as they drop. Crunch and Roll is a 969 media production presented by my mate, John Fox. What a lad, eh? What a good guy. And produced by the legend that is Simon Bajowski. Thanks very much indeed for listening. Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Scott, Joel said on his episode, whilst we were talking about you, that he remembers you just having 3 links, but I definitely remember you having 4.
Honestly, they nicknamed me the Sean Gojock. You know, I was the original Sean Gojock. So we'd go into the ads at 5-2 and I'd be in the car well before the news. I'd be kind of on the A63 by the time the 1 o'clock news came in. And I remember driving to when I was doing Radio Air, because Radio Air introduced 40-second links, and I always remember going to you going, I'm driving for a fucking hour and a half to do 2 minutes of radio, and it was 3 40-second links, you know. And it was one of those things, you know. You go, this is just bonkers. It's absolutely nuts.